our next speaker, he's one of my best friends, and I'm absolutely thrilled that he's coming to speak, because even though he's been one of my best friends for quite some time, I really don't know all of his story. So, Josh, if you could come up here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us today at Voices for Inspiration. I haven't spoken in front of a group like this in a long time, so I am going to read from notes as well, so anyone who has before me can relax. I hope that some of what you've heard today has inspired you. Being an inspiration to someone is, in my mind, a big responsibility. It's one that I've never been overly comfortable with, but I've come to accept it. Whether I feel like an inspiration or not, I am to someone. It could be the elderly person who sees me drive into a gas station, get out of my car, pump my gas, get back in my car and leave, or it could be to my 3 little nephews under 7 who don't see Uncle Josh, the man with the disability, they just see Uncle Josh with the cool chair that goes really, really fast. I come from small town Ontario, a town of Exeter to be exact. It's a community of mainly retired folks, and it's about 5,000 people. It was a bit of a shock coming to Mississauga from there, because I think there's 5,000 people in a block, but you get used to it. It was a great place to grow up, but it was also a challenge as well, due to the stereotypes of small town folks. I grew up among different generations, all of which had different views of people with disabilities. An example of this was when I was out for a walk with my mom one day and we met a lady from church. The 2 ladies chatted for a while and I waited patiently, or at least as patiently as a child can. And at one point, the woman said to my mom, without even looking at me, "And how's Joshua today?" My mom looked at her and without missing a beat said, "I don't know. Why don't you ask him?" So she did. It was about that time that I realized I was going to have to prove to people what I was capable of. I learned to be gracious, but not invisible. The lady was a little bit older and grew up in a time where disabled people were seen but not heard. I was going to run into people like that, and I was going to have to learn how to deal with it without being rude. I learned from my parents how important it was to self-advocate. When I was about a year away from high school, my parents took a tour of the local high school to see what I might be in for. They discovered a school that had no way for me to reach the 2nd floor. A 2nd floor where classes like computer science, English, and history were taught. You know, nothing important. Let's see. It was suggested by someone on staff that a few members of the football team could be enlisted to carry my wheelchair up the stairs. My parents didn't like that idea. It was probably back in a time where liability wasn't as much of an issue as it is now. My mom was also not pleased when told of what the school board's plan was. She was told by a trustee, "Oh, we ship kids like him to the accessible school 45 minutes away." My mom grew up on a farm, and when you ship animals to market, it's not good. She didn't like the phrase the official chose to use. Because of this, my parents did some research, and we found a service club that I could speak with who ended up raising the money to buy an elevator, and we donated it to the school board on the condition that they actually pay to have it put in. They did, and I was able to go to school with the people I grew up with. I still find it funny that they were willing to pay a taxi company to drive me 45 minutes one way to go to school, but were unwilling to pay, or unable to pay, for an elevator which solved the problem not only for me, but for any disabled person who went to the school after me. Not to mention some of the staff members who had trouble climbing the stairs themselves. If my parents and I hadn't advocated for ourselves, I would have ended up going to a school that I didn't need to go to, and having to make new friends that I didn't really need to make. My college career was at Lambton College in Sarnia, Ontario, and I do hold a degree in hospitality and tourism management. While I was at school, I learned how to advocate for myself and to use the resources that were made available to me. They had an office for students with disabilities, which was very helpful. I met them shortly after being accepted, and they were there to assist me throughout my academics. I learned how to deal with unreasonable expectations as well. My left foot is a clubbed foot, and it's difficult for me to find shoes that fit properly. I had a professor who invited a lot of industry professionals into the class to speak. He made it very clear very early on that a certain level of dress code was required, and that dress shoes were a part of it. I met with him and explained as nicely as I could that this just wasn't an option for me. But he insisted, so I went out, bought a cheap pair of dress shoes, wore them to the next class, and while talking to him after class, happened to move my foot, and the shoe, right on cue, fell off. He looked at me, looked at the shoe, and said, "Is that the problem you were telling me about?" I said, "Yes, sir, it is." "Okay, what kind of shoes were you going to wear?" I said, "A pair of plain black running shoes. You wouldn't even notice from a distance what they are." "Yeah, maybe that was a good idea," he said. So I won. Got to wear the shoes that I knew would work for me, and learned the value of advocating for my needs. As school went on, I began dealing with employers in the world of work. Interviews, interview locations, and employer expectations. These were all lessons that I had to learn. I learned that, as much as possible, I should try to be as normal as I could. Work things out in a way that worked for not only me, but for my employer. Having said that, 15 years into my working life, make sure that if you do have an issue, you speak to them about it. Don't try to deal with it yourself. I can't imagine what would have happened had I taken the job with the inaccessible restroom. I'm just kidding. I would never do something like that. But if it's fine motor skill problems that crop up during a long training class, issues with snow removal, or evacuation plans in the event of an emergency, those are things you need to speak up with because they can be issues and they can be used against you. You don't want to be told your attendance is poor when you can't get in the door because there's a snowdrift in front of it. That actually did happen once. Working has also taught me about adaptability. You need to figure out what your skills are and where they can be used. I started off in the travel and tourism industry, but today find myself in the financial services industry instead. Within my last company, I worked in 3 different departments, all because my skills were transferable. Each department gave me a chance to work with different skills that I possessed, but I just didn't use them in the industry I expected to. I thought that I would be in travel and tourism throughout my career. If I had told myself that I could only work there, then I may have spent many years unemployed. I started work in 1999, and in 2001 there was a small issue that kind of put the kibosh on the travel and tourism industry, 9/11. Because of that, and because I was transferable, I've been able to work almost non-stop since then. It just means looking at other places to work. Working life hasn't always been smooth sailing, of course. My first job out of school was a travel call center. I was interviewed on the Thursday before Thanksgiving. The Friday before Thanksgiving, I was asked to come to Mississauga for an interview. That was fine. I just had to make sure that my mom could get to work because I needed her car. Thanksgiving Monday, a day I wasn't expecting to get a phone call because it was a holiday, they actually called and said I had the job. Oh, and by the way, you start the next day. I looked at the phone and said, "I don't live there. How do you want me to start?" "Well, that's not really our problem," I was told. "The job starts tomorrow. Be here." So I talked it over with my parents, and we decided that I would just need to rent a motel room for a couple of days until I could find an apartment. I found a place to stay and was assured by a person on staff that the room was wheelchair accessible. Apparently, being wheelchair accessible is in the eye of the beholder. The room was part of a 50s style motel where you entered your room from the outside, not from a corridor inside. You also had to climb a lip that was probably almost as high as this stage. I got inside and called my parents to let them know how my first day had gone and how my first apartment viewing had gone. Apparently, I was a bit of a wreck. I lost it on the phone with my mom. I said, "I can't do this. This is too hard." And the words she said to me have stuck ever since. She said to me, "Son, I would like to come down there and save you, but I can't. You have choices, and you need to make one. You can check out of there in the morning and find a new place to stay. Option 2 is to check out in the morning and drive 2 hours each way from our place until you find an apartment. Option 3 is to check out in the morning, go into work, resign from the first job you've ever had, and possibly never do anything with your life again. The choice is yours." She hates this story because she thinks I make her off to be mean. In reality, she was just being honest. I told her she was right, of course, and that I would sleep on it. I checked out in the morning and attempted to go into work. But being new to the city, I got lost and ended up down near the apartment building I had toured the night before, which incidentally would not have worked for me. I called the office and told them I'd be late. When I got there, I was in a terrible mood, and I wasn't entirely sure that I wasn't just going to quit. The trainer, a very nice woman named Michelle, saw me wheel in and said, "Good morning, Josh. I'm glad you made it in... Oh, I'll catch up with you in a bit." Apparently, the look on my face could have killed. We got to break, and she asked what was wrong. I told her everything and that I was probably going to have to resign my position. She took one look at me and said, "Don't decide yet," put out her cigarette, and disappeared inside the building. When I got back to the training room, she dropped a piece of paper on my desk and said, "Here's your reservation number. You're booked at the Regal Constellation Hotel. You're booked there until the end of the week at the travel agent's rate. Decide then what you're going to do." I learned that I needed to have faith in other people and that I was valuable to somebody. I'd begun to think I was in over my head and might not have amounted to anything, but that proved me wrong. After my week at the Constellation, I did decide to stay on at my job, but I decided that financially I couldn't keep living in hotels. It just wasn't viable. So I chose to drive back and forth from Exeter until I found a place. Thankfully, gas was a lot cheaper then than it is now, and I found a place during my second week of training. I've lived there at Hurontario on the 403 ever since. The last thing that I'll talk to you about today is that you need to be able to laugh at yourself and to always be humble. I can't count the number of situations I've been in where I can only smile and say thank you, or laugh at the situation after the fact. There was the Jesuit minister who moonlighted as a clown and wanted to say a prayer for me during an Easter Seals event. The elderly gentleman sitting in his car when I came out of a convenience store, who, by the time I'd gotten into my car, was standing next to my window and wanted to tell me how inspirational I was for just being able to drive. Then there was the little Asian gentleman who asked me in stunned amazement if I drove the car I was putting gas into. And then there's one other story. And this one I'll choose to go into a little more detail about because it's one of my favorites. I was filling up at a Shell station not far away, and a minivan pulled in behind me. For some reason, the person driving the vehicle didn't get out until I was finished. I thought perhaps they needed to use the diesel pump that I was partially blocking, but I couldn't figure out why, as I didn't think minivans took diesel. I've never driven one, so I don't know. As I was getting into my car, a woman approached me, and I figured, okay, here we go. I'm going to get blasted for blocking the pump. She approached cautiously, and she said, excuse me, sir. I have an 8-year-old in the car who's an amputee, and we were really intrigued watching you pump your gas. How do you drive, if you don't mind me asking? So I told her I didn't mind at all and showed her how the hand controls on my car worked. She said, we were watching you get your chair out of your car, and my daughter said to me, Mommy, I don't think I could do that. I explained to her that it really wasn't very hard, and that she absolutely could do it if she needed to. She just needed to find the way that worked for her. I also told her that I played sports. She told me that she was working with an organization for amputees, which I choose not to say the name of, and was told that it would be dangerous for her daughter to play sports. I laughed. Couldn't help myself. I told her that I played sports with and against amputees all the time. It was dangerous, of course, any sport is, but that it was absolutely the best thing I'd ever done. I gave her the name of the sports organization that I competed with, Cruiser Sports, and suggested that she give one of our coaches a call. I was sure that she could play most of the same sports I did. She thanked me and they drove off. They had a meeting to get to. I hope she called someone, but I haven't heard anything. That's pretty much my story up until this point. If you want to hear about some of the stories I've glossed over, I'm happy to share them privately. Thank you for listening. I hope something I've said has been valuable. I'm not used to being inspiring, even though in hindsight I guess I seem to be. I just live my life believing that the challenges I face are ones that can be overcome. It's just up to me to figure out how. Whatever it is, I'll deal with it.